The South Carolina Hall of Fame was founded in Myrtle Beach in 1973 to recognize and honor contemporary and past citizens who have made outstanding contributions to South Carolina's heritage, history, and progress.
Beginning in the 17th century, generations of men with the Pinckney name wielded influence in South Carolina. One of them, Charles Pinckney, made contributions that went far beyond the state. His ideas about government helped forge the United States Constitution and had a lasting impact on other leaders for decades to come.
Charles Pinckney was a very important, yet often overlooked, early national political figure. He has been unfairly painted as someone who overstated his own contributions, as someone who was vain, as someone who was arrogant. The fact is, he made very, very important and significant contributions, not only to the state of South Carolina, but to the nation and to the Constitution.
Leading up to the War for Independence, the Carolina Low Country was the wealthiest colony in British North America. New York, Boston, Philadelphia areas couldn't even compare to the wealth that was concentrated in and around the Charleston area.
The first Pinckney on record in the colonies was Thomas, who arrived in Charleston from Jamaica in 1692. He established his family and the Pinckney name as a major player in the early colonial period of the South Carolina Low Country. His progeny would be merchants, planters, lawyers, and military leaders, many of whom bore the same name, Charles. One of Thomas Pinckney's grandsons, named Charles, would become a prominent Charleston planter with numerous plantations, a lawyer, and eventually colonel during the American Revolution. He married Frances Bruton, and on October 26, 1757, she gave birth to a son whom they named Charles as well.
The Pinckney family had long distinguished itself in South Carolina, serving in the Assembly, serving on the Council. I mean, he had cousins and kin in all aspects of service in South Carolina.
Charles Pinckney's primary residence was in downtown Charleston at approximately what would be 16 Meeting Street today. He and his family owned a number of plantations around the state, with Sneed Farm being what was described in the will of Charles Pinckney's father as the most important plantation.
His father used Sneed Farm and Christ Church Parish. That's where he originally entered politics. Charles Pinckney will use that same stepping stone. And when he goes to the polls to vote, he finds that there are only two people present to vote, and that's his overseer and himself. When he joins the assembly for the first time, the speaker, Christopher Gadsden, even comments, "I have it on good authority that he was elected unanimously by his constituents." So, two people, but he was still elected unanimously. That will be cut short almost immediately by him joining the militia and being caught up in the Revolutionary War.
At age 21, Charles Pinckney was a lawyer, a state representative, and now a lieutenant in the South Carolina militia. His first exposure to war was at the bloody siege of Savannah. When the British occupied Charlestown in May of 1780, they put Charles Pinckney under house arrest. Fearful that the British would confiscate his land, Colonel Pinckney switched sides, renouncing the Patriot cause and becoming a loyalist.
While his father has taken protection, Charles Pinckney resists what were probably efforts to get him to do the same thing and ends up in a prison ship with terrible conditions. Prison ships were notorious for the inhumane conditions. Smallpox was just prevalent on those ships. Men died on those ships. They were hot, they were crowded, they were dirty. And so he wrote a letter protesting those conditions, where he expressed his regret that all those men on those ships were unable to participate in the Patriot cause.
The effort proved effective. A little over a month on the pack horse, Pinckney and the other prisoners were released and paroled to Philadelphia, where they waited out the end of the war.
You know, the convention that met in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution couldn't be done today because they met in secret, because they knew that what they were going to propose could be controversial.
The Pinckney draft that he presents to the Constitutional Convention on the third full day of its meeting is very similar to the Virginia plan that Edmund Randolph presents. There are some differences, but it's very similar. The convention will actually work from the Virginia plan when they are adopting the Constitution, but they will draw on Pinckney's plan for inspiration, language. Some of the language almost is exactly the same. His plan will be referred to a committee, and that committee will use it as they are writing the Constitution. They will draw from it.
When the convention ended on September 17, 1787, the Constitution included a proposal for ratification requiring approval by each state. The delegates weren't sure if the new state legislatures would accept this. Charles's cousin, Thomas Pinckney, presided over the ratifying convention in South Carolina. In the old Exchange Building in Charleston, Charles Pinckney gave opening remarks. That same year, Charles Pinckney married Mary Eleanor Laurens, the daughter of wealthy merchant and politically powerful Henry Laurens. The following year, he was elected governor of South Carolina and presided over the state's constitutional convention. During his first term as governor, Pinckney oversaw the relocating of the state's capital from Charleston to Columbia, and his allegiance to the Low Country began to shift. During Pinckney's second term as governor, George Washington visited him at Sneef Farm, located in Christ Church Parish on what is now Mount Pleasant. Washington also dined with Pinckney at his residence at 16 Meeting Street in Charleston, and Pinckney escorted the president to numerous assemblies in his honor. In 1794, shortly before Pinckney was elected to a third term as governor, his wife Mary gave birth to a son, Henry Laurens Pinckney. After serving 2 years of his third term as governor, Charles was appointed to the United States Senate in 1798 to fill the seat vacated by John Hunter. There, his ideas about the role of the central government began to reflect those of Thomas Jefferson. Pinckney began working diligently to correspond with the backcountry residents of South Carolina, whom he believed would become the enduring power base of the state. In 1800, he returned home to his plantation on the Congaree River to begin garnering support for Jefferson in his campaign for the presidency. Jefferson's Federalist opponent is Charles Pinckney's very own cousin, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. He writes in a letter to Jefferson,
"My family is no longer speaking to me."
As a reward for his support of Jefferson, he had been wanting to go to Europe since he was a very young man. He finally fulfilled his dream to go to Europe when he's appointed minister to Spain in 1801 by Jefferson.
Charles Pinckney returned to South Carolina in 1805 to face a terrible shock. His plantations were in ruins and his money was almost gone. Despite his financial setback, Charles Pinckney was once again elected governor of the state of South Carolina for a final term. Subsequently, he served another 4 years in the State House of Representatives from 1810 to 1814, seemingly putting his political career to rest. In 1818, John Quincy Adams begins compiling the record of the Constitutional Convention, gathering all the documents he can to be included in the publication. One of the documents missing is the Pinckney draft.
He retires from public life, and then, lo and behold, he turns around and he runs for the United States House of Representatives in 1819. He is elected, and he goes to Washington to become a representative. And while he is a representative, the Missouri Compromise issue comes before the United States Congress.
Missouri wanted to come in as a slave state. which of course would upset the balance in the United States Senate, which had an equal number of slave states and free states.
Pinckney was a champion of the pro-slavery forces and argued that the federal government, specifically Congress, did not have the right to prohibit slavery in Missouri as a precondition for its admission as a new state.
He was opposed to the idea that the federal government could in any way interfere with slavery, in any way interfere with that aspect of a state's power. And those speeches are going to eventually influence folks who will come after him, who are going to sort of seize upon this, what will become a more radical state rights ideology.
When Charles Pinckney left office in 1823, he had devoted 42 years to public service. The following year, he passed away and is buried in St. Philip's Episcopal Churchyard in Charleston. In 1861, during the Civil War, a great fire consumed the city of Charleston. With it, the Pinckney House at 16 Meeting Street and the collection of manuscripts contained within all perished. All that physically remains of Pinckney's legacy is the family's smallest plantation known as Snee Farm in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, preserved, protected, and managed by the National Park Service.
It was a gentleman's duty to serve the public weal, to serve the public good. And I think Charles Pinckney is one of the greatest exemplars of that in South Carolina and United States history.
The fact is, he was a transitional and transformative figure. He bridged several gaps at several different levels. He does not deserve to be forgotten. He deserves to be remembered.
His embrace of liberty had important consequences for the subsequent unfolding of American history and the way in which all of our lives have been improved subsequently by that legal document that we continue to cherish and we continue to live by, the American Constitution.
This program is funded in part by the Friends of Historic Snee Farm and the Humanities Council, South Carolina.